This is SoundStage founder Doug Schneider. You're listening to the SoundStage Audiophile Podcast, your semi-regular deep dive into news, facts, opinions, and anecdotes about everything that really matters in the world of high-performance audio. Hosts Brent Butterworth and Dennis Berger have more than 5 decades worth of audio product testing experience, and a few hours of podcasting experience as well. Now, here's Brent and Dennis.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dennis Berger.
And I'm Brent Butterworth.
Brent currently writes for SoundStage, Wirecutter, Audio Express, and Jazz Times. He's also the former editor of Home Theater and Home Entertainment magazines. He wrote for Sound and Vision, Home Theater Review, and way too many other publications to list here. He was also the marketing director for Dolby Labs.
You forgot that I wrote for Law Enforcement Technology as well.
I didn't know you wrote for Law Enforcement Technology as well.
But that won't be applicable here today, I hope. Dennis Berger currently writes for SoundStage, Wirecutter, and Cinelux, and has written for Home Theater Review, Home Theater Magazine, Residential Systems, and more magazines and websites than I can possibly think of or name.
Yeah, I can't keep track of them either. So
yeah.
What are we doing here, Brent?
This is the SoundStage Audiophile Podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And so that means we are going to talk about things that are of interest to audiophiles, although I think we're going to cover a little bit more of a broad spectrum than a lot of audiophile-oriented things do, because SoundStage, the website, soundstage.com, covers a pretty broad spectrum. You know, there's like super high-end, $50,000 speakers, and there's also, I think, like $50 Bluetooth speakers in there and pretty much everything in between. So,
yeah. SoundStage Access, which is my site, focuses on affordable audio and also, beginner tips and tricks for beginners, people who are just getting into this. So
okay, and there's a bunch of, I do SoundStage Solo, which is the headphone site, and there's a bunch of others, but you can find them all at soundstage.com. That's the easiest thing to remember.
Yeah.
So what are we? I was about to ask you what we're talking about.
Well, we've got a few topics for this week. I think we're going to start off with speakers versus headphones, which is the topic that brought us here to begin with. And then you've got something interesting that you want to talk about.
I do. This is from Steve Guttenberg's YouTube channel, which is called the Audiophiliac. And it's a recent video he posted that's titled, "Before You Buy an Expensive Speaker, Watch This Video." And I agree. One of those rare cases where I agree with Steve that you should watch the video. And we're going to talk about what he says, because I think it's pretty solid. I mean, I have some different attitudes towards some of the things he says, but it's pretty different advice than you're going to see in a lot of audio publications, and I think it's pretty solid.
Yeah. I also want to dig into a new Kickstarter project that's out right now. I'm a little dubious when it comes to audio products on Kickstarter, but there are these new headphones with involvement from Axel Grau, called the Heavies headphones. I think they were originally called the Heavies Antichrist, but they purport to be the perfect headphones for heavy metal fans. So I've got some thoughts.
I do too. And and so last, we're going to talk about, also from SoundStage, an article that was written by our own editor-in-chief, Jeff Fritz, called Stereophile and D'Agostino. Is it really a progression? And what he's talking about is there's a new, like, super expensive amp from Dan D'Agostino Master Audio Systems called the Progression M550, and it is about $45K a pair. And he's talking about how it got a review in Stereophile where the writer loved it, but they found in the measurements that it was not something that's technically perhaps as buttoned down as the work that Dan D'Agostino is known for. And we're going to get into a probably broader discussion, I think, about what those kind of measurements really mean, because we feature those measurements on most of the SoundStage articles as well. And what those measurements really mean. Can you ignore the measurements? Are they important? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It may not surprise you that I have opinions on this subject.
I'm never, ever surprised when you have opinions on anything, Brent.
Okay.
So should we dive right into speakers versus headphones and how we ended up here?
Let's do. Why don't you take the lead on that, since it's your article?
Yeah. Oh, the thing is, it was actually kind of not an article. It was supposed to be. Jeff had pitched an idea to me to do sort of a beginner's guide to what you gain and what you lose by moving from headphones to a proper stereo speaker setup and vice versa. And is so often the case when I'm sort of presented with a topic that I'm trying to figure out how to make interesting. I called you and we got on a Zoom call and we hashed it out. And honestly, when I read the transcript, it was far more entertaining than anything I could have written myself. So I just transcribed it basically like a text podcast and turned it in. And Doug, our publisher, loved it so much. He was like, you guys should do a podcast. So
and here we are.
And here we are indeed. And also, interestingly enough, that piece was responsible for our first piece of joint fan mail.
Oh, wow.
You don't
fan
remember
mail?
this?
Not used to that.
Yeah. Jeffrey Henning, regular reader, regular emailer. Should I just read it?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Here's what Jeff had to say about the piece. Listen, Hamburglar and Mrs. Butterworth. And Jeff is a bit irreverent, which I think we both appreciate. He goes on, your school of thought is somewhat incorrect. And then he gives us some bullet points. Speakers in the proper config can offer something more like the live sound of a performance, but they are limited by the room regardless of the number of channels, unless the room is superb. Even then, it's still a great approximation and not a true recreation. Great headphones, on the other hand, of whatever type, will never offer the full Monty as to reality, but then neither will the best TV in its image. The big thing with phones is that you have a representation of low bass, but no actual low bass rattling your guts. The physical part of the low bass is often discounted or ignored. And then he goes on to say, I can't take my home theater on a train, or my Odyssey iSign 20s will never truly sound like a live performance. They're both scaled down and idealized. Great speakers and a surround system will always be better than headphones, but that's not really the point. I enjoy both, which I kind of think is exactly what you and I said in our discussion.
Yeah. Well, it's quite often that I get letters from people that are disagreeing, that are purporting to disagree with me, but actually do agree with what I said. So that's not uncommon.
Yeah.
But it's the internet, man. So anyway, so what was your conclusion? Headphones versus speakers?
Well, my conclusion was I like them for different purposes. I mean, they're both great. I kind of disagree with the whole notion that a proper stereo setup, can recreate the effect of listening to live music. I don't know. I've never heard that sort of illusion myself. I mean, it's a reasonable approximation, I guess, but I think you're tilting at windmills trying to actually take speakers and amplifiers and make it sound like you're listening to live music. You can get a center image and things like that, and that's nice. So it's just something you can't get with headphones very well, not without. Well, I'm just
hard.
I'm sitting here recounting her story. Yeah, but
okay.
but also when I'm listening to the Allman Brothers Band or something like that, I love strapping on a pair of cans and just getting lost in the fine little details that are going to be sort of absorbed by any room. The hum of the amps, the textures of the strings, all of those things come out so much more in headphones. But they're trade-offs. What about you? Is there anything?
So I really think that you can kind of get close to a live performance with both headphones if you have like binaural recordings, right? Which Chesky Records has done, and is still kind of, I think, dabbling with. Where they put a binaural mic, which is like a dummy head. It's like a fake head, like you use to measure headphones. And It's got microphones in the ears, and it actually kind of encodes the audio the same kind of way that your ears would. So when you play it back over headphones, it sounds kind of like a live performance. And Chesky has a couple of them. I mean, arguably probably the best are the two albums they did with Camille Thurman, who's a singer and sax player in the jazz realm. And one of them's in a really small performance hall, and one of them's in a large hall. And they're both really great performances because she's really good. And you really get a realistic sense of the acoustics of the space and the performers arrayed around you and all that sort of thing. But then also, I think that, a good, like, especially a surround sound system, maybe a stereo system, if you get honestly, like some Martin Logan's, big panel speakers, big, electrostatic panel speakers. These things are like 6 feet high and, a couple feet wide, and they're real thin. They're, you can actually see through them.
Yeah.
And if you get those kind of speakers, I think it kind of gets you something close to like a real live performance, depending, of course, on the recording that you have. And, you get a real wraparound effect. And you can get that from some regular box speakers as well. But, I think you can get kind of close. I think but, as a musician, right? Like a, amateur, musician.
You are a professional, sir. You've released an album.
I make some money at it, not a lot of money. I make no money on the album, but who does? Okay. I mean, I got a gig tomorrow night. Okay. So I'm playing, right? But as a musician, I don't think there's anything like the live experience, because you're there with the performers and you're appreciating the whole thing. And there's just no way a stereo system is going to be able to replicate that. But I think speakers and headphones are both fine. And
yeah,
I use them both. And I don't think like, oh my gosh, I'm going over to a set of headphones, I must adjust my expectations thusly. And I mean, it's like, this is not that hard. You put the stuff on and you hear all the notes and you hear the timing of the notes and you hear, a lot of sonic details and things like that. And you can get a great experience with either one of them. And I don't think that one of them is necessarily superior. I'll say this much: headphones are a lot easier because you put them on your head and turn them on, and that's the sound, as opposed to speakers where you end up messing around a lot with, because the room has such a big effect on them, and it can mess up the sound, and it sounds different depending on where you sit in the room, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And a lot of people are really not good at positioning speakers. And so, especially once you get further away from people who are audio enthusiasts, they might put their left and right speakers on top of each other. I mean, I've seen it done. At least with headphones, there's just no way to screw it up unless they don't fit you right.
I think one of the salient points of our conversation, though, is that, interestingly enough, and this is becoming truer and truer every day, a good speaker simply sounds like a good speaker. They have figured out what a good speaker sounds like. Whereas I feel like every time I put on a pair of headphones, it's just a completely different experience for the most part, especially once you get into sort of the higher end headphones. They all sound so different in ways that I don't like.
They do. And I mean, the headphone industry is not as sort of standardized as the speaker industry, but the speaker industry has some pretty wacky stuff going on too. Not for any good reason, in my opinion, but they do. But yeah, headphones are a lot more random, because even some of the big names in headphones, your Sennheiser, for example, will make, and others too, probably, Sony, will make headphones that have all sorts of different sounds. And, if one of them's right, the other's got to be wrong, right? But we can discuss that a little bit later, I think.
Okay. But, actually, in a lot of ways, that sort of plays right into the discussion of Guttenberg's new video. So why don't we take a short break and dig into that?
Okay.
Great. We'll be right back.
Hey, we're back with the SoundStage Audiophile Podcast with Brent Butterworth and Dennis Berger.
That's me.
And I'm Brent. So what we're going to discuss next is from our good friend Steve Guttenberg, who is a noted audio critic of, I don't know, I met him probably 25 years ago. So he was at it before then. So Steve has a YouTube channel called the Audiophiliac. Check it out. He's got new videos up there, at least a couple of them a week, 3, 4, I don't know how many a week. And but he just posted one a few days ago that's titled, "Before You Buy an Expensive Speaker, Watch This Video." And of course, he's, Steve knows how to get people to click on his videos. So,
he is very good at it.
So he's trying to create some sensation there. But really, what he's talking about in the video is exactly what he says in the headline. He says, I think a lot of people get into audio and they look at, a high-end publication like SoundStage or something, and they start to see that, there's all these expensive speakers out there. Maybe I should just jump right in and buy a $10,000 a pair speaker or something. And Steve says, no, that's the wrong way to do it. He says, instead of doing that, why don't you spend a few years buying a bunch of other kinds of speakers, not necessarily expensive ones, but speakers of different kinds of configurations, such as, a regular box speaker, like I think most people are used to, or a panel speaker like an electrostatic, a Martin Logan, or like the big planar magnetic speakers like Magnepans, or like an open back speaker like Emerald Physic has them and a few other names, or some of these single driver speakers that cover the full range with one driver, like Zoo Audio more or less makes a speaker like that, and Voxative and people like that. And so what Steve is saying is you should get all these different speakers and experience them and really learn what sound works for you, for your taste, for the music you listen to, maybe for your room, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the thing that I like about this so much, about what he said, is that I don't see being an audiophile as like, well, I mean, I'm sure some people do, but I don't see audiophile as like, yeah, I want the best audio system, because then that's just bragging and that's not a journey. I think real audiophiles, the ones that I want to talk to, are on a journey, and they're trying different things, and they want to experience the whole of audio, not just like, oh, I want the best, Yeah. And so there's necessarily anything wrong with wanting the best. However, in audio, it's more fun if you really explore it and hear all the different things, which will also drive you to probably listen to different kinds of music. And I mean, it certainly has made me listen to different kinds of music and different kinds of recordings and all this sort of thing. So Steve is basically saying, go buy these speakers for, not necessarily a lot of money. I mean, box speakers cost whatever you want to spend, from about $30 up to about, $500,000 or something. Oh, yeah. And then, but, panel speakers, you can go buy pretty affordable ones from Magnepan and Martin Logan. And I really think people should. You can go buy, but, where I start to deviate from what Steve said, though, Steve, I think, has the attitude that a lot of other audio writers have. And that's that, hey, this is all just a matter of opinion, and whatever you like is just fine. And I can see that. However, there's a lot of stuff done in audio that's really not very good. And there's a lot of designers who just sort of design audio products by the seat of their pants, who really don't look at what's come before them. They don't look at the science. They don't build a knowledge base. They just start messing around. And then also they tend to embrace technologies that we know don't work. Okay, for example, these speakers that have a single driver, with like a woofer that's 6.5 inches across maybe, and like a wizard cone, the little sort of quasi tweeter in the middle of it. Yeah. Those speakers, none of those speakers have natural sound. And there are writers who will say, oh, well, I find them to be, they're much simpler, so they have much more natural sound, right. But they just flat out don't. You can measure them, and if you listen to them in a blind test where you don't know what you're hearing, no one would pick that speaker. Yeah. I mean, nobody. I mean, yeah. They grossly color the sound. They have a real, they don't have a broad dispersion. So it means that they sound kind of like this, right? Mm-hmm. They have what we call cupped hands distortion. And maybe you dig that, but I personally don't. And so, I just think that some of these steps, it's better just to skip entirely and, find out what works. I mean, look, going and buying like a single driver speaker. I mean, I've seen some of these things where it's like a little, 5-inch driver or something with a wizard cone and a big giant, transmission line enclosure where the thing's like 6 feet high, and it's got this one dumb little driver sitting there burping away. Yeah. And you can go to audio shows and see this, and it's just, those things just don't sound good. They don't. I think people buy into it as I was actually at a show. I was at Rocky Mountain Audio Fest with Steve Guttenberg and Mike Trey, who is another noted audio writer. and turntable setup guy. And so I was asking them, what is it with these single driver speakers? And one of them, I can't remember if it was Mike or Steve, said, it's kind of a religious thing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so much of audio is, True. I want to throw something at you real quick. Yeah. I find them a lot of times with things like this, it boils down to there is a kernel of truth to the impulse, the original impulse. And by that, I mean, like decades ago, way before I even got into audio, people started bringing up some of the issues that could be caused by feedback and amplifier designs. And then I think a lot of audiophiles decided, well, feedback is just awful then, and also crossovers. There can be problems with crossover designs. And so I think a lot of audiophiles are like, crossovers are bad, and so some of these specific products come along that address that pain point. Well, you think crossovers are bad? Well, our speaker doesn't even have a crossover, so therefore it must be great.
Yeah, you say they address the pain point. I say they cynically pander to that bias. But whatever. And
potato, tomato. Yeah.
I think now I will say I think some of these manufacturers really believe that some wacky speaker they invented with really bizarre frequency response measurements is better. I think a lot of them do genuinely believe that. Mm-hmm. However, there's a lot of things that people genuinely believe that are not supportable. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't mean like, hey, they're just as right as anybody else because they believe it. Yeah. So I think in audio, we do have, although we often, manufacturers and many publications sort of pretend that we don't have any kind of standards for anything, but we do. And we know what works and we know what doesn't. But a lot of speaker design is pretty random. And frankly, a lot of it doesn't really deserve our respect because it's made for a lot of reasons other than a genuine, rational drive towards having good sound.
Well, and I think a lot of it also, there is limited functionality. You and I have been to a lot of audio shows, and I think you and I have probably experienced the same thing where you walk into a suite or a booth or what have you, and they want you to hear this recording of an Aborigine playing the didgeridoo at the summer solstice, and they recorded it themselves on a DAT. And this is what I want you to listen to. Okay, well, I have no frame of reference, Whereas, our friend Sandy Gross, I could always walk into Sandy's booth, and Sandy's like, "What do you want to hear? You want to hear some Doors? You want to hear some Lyle Lovett? Like, you can listen to anything." Whereas a lot of these kookier, single driver speakers, full range drivers, what have you, they're very selective in what you're going to be allowed to listen to, and oftentimes it's like, Livingston Taylor's Isn't She Lovely for the 900 millionth freaking time.
Indeed. So we should probably wrap this up, but I encourage people to go to YouTube and go look up the Audiophiliac. You could probably figure out how to spell it. And see Steve Guttenberg's channel. He's got piles of videos in there, and Steve is always entertaining, so check it out.
And he has a new podcast as well, also called the Audiophiliac, and I believe he had somebody really, really cool in his first episode.
I was honored to be his first guest, so I was probably just the first person he could talk into having on. So, Steve gets tons of people. Everyone loves Steve. So,
everybody loves Steve.
Okay, so we should wrap that up and take a break and be back in a couple minutes.
See you on the other side. And we're back. So our next topic is, I think there's probably going to be a little bit of controversy here because we're going to be talking about one of the most discussed Kickstarter projects going on right now, the Heavies headphones, which have had a little bit of an interesting marketing angle. They were originally called the Heavies Antichrist. They quickly dropped that, but the whole premise here is that these are headphones designed to appeal, less charitably, you might say, pander to metalheads, people who love heavy metal. These promise to be the first headphones that are really do justice to heavy metal music. But the weird thing is they've got some interesting technology going on, and they've got a little bit of an interesting backstory. in that they have the some level of participation from Axel Grau of Sennheiser fame.
Okay.
With the father of the Sennheiser HD series. Is that not correct?
As I understand it, yeah, and that's a revered set of headphones that has been around for a good 20 years.
Yeah.
And some of his work has resulted in headphones that are considered to be, industry standards. I think it's fair to say.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite amongst those? Because I have to admit, I'm kind of partial to the HD 250.
I like the HD 800S, which is the super expensive one, and then I also like the HD 600.
Oh yeah,
650 is a little too dark sounding for me, but the 600 is a little brighter. I think it was a top pick on Wirecutter, might still be. I can't remember, and it's also more affordable. So
yeah,
that's always nice.
But yeah, these heavy things are actually quad driver, and they've got 2 bass drivers and 2 high frequency drivers, and the high frequency drivers
right?
Per ear, yeah, and the high frequency drivers are loaded in the front of the ear cup, so they actually fire backwards, so they promise to create something resembling like a center image and so forth. But yeah, there's a lot going on here and a lot to discuss. I'm just curious. I mean, given that you're the headphone guru, what's the first thing that stood out to you about these things when you first saw them?
Well, if they're marketed for heavy metal, I mean, I am something of a metal fan and have been for my whole life. I mean, I've seen I'm proud to say I saw Celtic Frost in their heyday.
Oh, wow.
The original extreme metal band. And,
well, then you are perfectly positioned to tell us all why other headphones suck for heavy metal.
Well, they don't necessarily, but there hasn't. It's been a largely ignored audience, and it's an audience that is a lot more serious than I think people give them credit for. It's definitely got its own aesthetic. The people that play it are by and large skilled. I think that maybe in the days of in the early days of metal, they weren't, but a lot of them are extremely skilled musicians, and they play like 7 or 8 string guitars. And it's a really interesting genre, and it's not just stupid, loud stuff. It's got a lot of subtlety to it. Anyway, so this genre and this audience is by and large ignored by the headphone industry. And so they are Axel Grell, who I take it is a metal fan, has created these headphones that are specifically designed and voiced for metal. And there are some fascinating things going on in these headphones.
Really fascinating. I think one of the things that stands out to me that I don't really understand is that they claim you can play these louder, but without generating higher SPLs. And I'm almost wondering if that's just like sort of a loudness control, or if that's a perceptual thing, or...
Nowadays, pretty much every set of headphones that's active that has built-in amplification has also digital signal processing built in. And by and large, what people do with the digital signal processing is they just do some EQ. They'll boost the treble a little bit here. They'll kick down, they'll pull the bass down in this one region, things like that, right? So, and it's really easy to do with digital EQ with a digital signal processor, as opposed to doing it in the old-fashioned domain where you're doing it by messing around with the physical form factor of the headphones. Anyway, so, but in addition to that, they're actually putting compression into these things and volume limiting as well. So what that means is that, first of all, you're not going to blow your ears out, or at least you're not going to blow your ears out like you would with a normal set of passive headphones cranking them, right? Where you might be exceeding, you might be getting into the high 90s, maybe even 100 decibels, where you're going to damage your hearing within like an hour or less, half an hour, something like that. So with these, they actually do, watch out for your hearing, but they also add compression, which means they're going to, the loud sounds are going to get quieter and the quieter sounds are going to get louder. So there's less dynamic range, but the whole thing sounds louder. So it'll be more satisfying if you listen to like some of these kids' headphones that are limited to like 85 decibels, right? They're fine to listen to, but sometimes you want to go a little louder, right?
Yeah.
So but you can't do anything because they're limited to 85 decibels. With these, I'm assuming they're going to go louder than that. They'll probably go up into the low 90s, I would guess, because that's still reasonably safe for a couple hours. But they're going to add compression to make it more satisfying to listen at that volume. Okay. So I don't know, frankly. I mean, I use compressors. I was using compressors doing some mixing last night. I use them all the time. I know what compressors sound like, and they can really make the music sound better, and they can make it sound worse. Mm-hmm. And a lot of heavy metal is also very, very heavily compressed anyway. So I can't predict whether or not this is really going to work, but I applaud them, first of all, for actually caring about their customers' hearing. Second of all, not just saying, oh, well, you shouldn't listen any louder than this, and if you listen any louder than this, you're a bad person, or you're just endangering your health or whatever, where they're saying, hey, we understand why you want to listen louder, and we're going to make it satisfying to listen at a quieter level. And, nobody else is doing that. I mean, everyone's, people really aren't doing that much with digital signal processing yet in headphones. And I just think it's so amazing that this company is really getting creative and trying to deliver a real benefit to consumers that they will appreciate.
I wish they would introduce a new model that's targeted toward the underserved Yacht Rock community. That's what I really need. I have
I'm not sure what features that would have. Do you have any particular ideas?
Oh man, they've just got to really, really make that electric piano sing. That's probably the crucial element.
Oh, I don't know. The doobie bounce, right?
That's what they call that. Bounce. Yeah.
What was that song? Minute by Minute. Is that it?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. No. It was the What a Fool Believes.
Oh, what a fool believes.
Yeah, you're singing way too low there, but Michael McDonald is into glass breaking territory in that song. But yeah,
so
I have to admit,
I'm no Michael McDonald.
Well, who is?
I can't even grow the beard, much less sing like that. But
I have to admit, I don't like this idea of creating an audio product that is designed specifically for one genre of music. And the reason I say that is because, I have heard products. I reviewed just a couple of years ago some wireless headphones that, oh gosh, you put the doobie bounce on them, they sounded incredible. You play hip hop and they just sounded amazing. And then I would go to listen to Queen, and it would just be hot garbage. Like, Freddie would be simultaneously, strident and recessed in the mix. I think once you start trying to cater to a specific genre of music, well, you've lost a general applicability that my musical tastes are so all over the place that, I need something that's going to work for everything, man.
Well, but we don't know what their implementation is, and they may have different modes in there for different things. It may not be like, look, is this thing going to make a Miles Davis recording sound like Black Sabbath? I don't know. Is that good? Is that bad? I don't know that either. But it looks, you sent me this shot of him, of Axel Grell, apparently looking at frequency response readouts on an audio precision analyzer. Mm-hmm. And judging from, I'm assuming these are the curves he's going to use, and they're not just some random curves they throw on screen. And they are headphone measurements, I can tell that much. But the voicing, he's definitely showing some different modes. There's at least 3 different modes that I can see in this picture. Now, the voicing looks really bizarre.
Like every one of the voicings has this really, really, really weird bump from like 5K to 10K.
Yeah, whereas that should normally you have a big bump at like 3 kilohertz or something, which is sort of like the top of the vocal range, where a lot of your sounds come from. So normally you have a big bump at 3K or something, then a smaller one at like 5 or 6 or 7K. And these have a giant bump at, what is that, about 6K? And then they're dead flat from, about like 4, pretty much dead flat from about 4K down to about 300 hertz, which I don't know what that sounds like. It's definitely going to be an outlier, but maybe this audience will like that, and who knows what their modes. And that then they also have some different amounts of bass in the different modes, and I don't know what that's going to sound like, but I'm nothing if not open-minded. So
yeah, maybe they'll send you the first review sample, because I did read on their Facebook page that they're going to be bringing in audio reviewers soon. So,
oh, good.
Have you ever heard any really good multi-driver headphones, by the way?
I did hear there was a company called OSIC, OSSIC, that was gonna do a like a sort of VR-oriented headphone with surround sound and multi-drivers, and I heard a prototype of it, and it was pretty encouraging, but they never got off the ground and they went out of business.
It's kind of hard to tell with the heavies, because it's in the marketing, it says that each speaker releases sound in the frequency range that suits its purpose. So it kind of seems like they're going to be doing different voicing for each of the woofers and each of the tweeters.
But although then they have two woofers, so
yeah,
but two tweeters. So
right, yeah, it's a little. I don't know either.
Hey man, the guy does know what he's doing. Okay, he's designed a lot of headphones. It's not like he clearly understands acoustics. Okay, so I have high hopes for these, but we don't even know if these are going to launch. It's a Kickstarter project, so yeah, we don't know for sure. I sure hope they do, because even if they don't, I think a lot of some other headphone manufacturers have to be looking at this going like, let's steal a couple of those ideas. There's a lot of DSP horsepower that's just sitting around right now in audio. I'm just going to come out and say that.
I'm very much looking forward to seeing your measurements of them. But I think that actually is a really nice segue into the next topic we're going to talk about, which is this whole progression amp kerfuffle. So why don't we take a break real quick and then dig into that?
All right, kerfuffle coming up. Okay, we're back with the SoundStage Audiophile Podcast, Dennis Berger and Brent Butterworth. And the topic that we're going to finish out this segment with is from SoundStage Ultra, an article written by Jeff Fritz, our editor-in-chief of the whole SoundStage network. And SoundStage Ultra is Jeff's own microsite, and it focuses on super high-end audio equipment. And so it's always interesting because there's a lot of stuff going on in super high-end audio equipment, and it's usually controversial. No less here in his article, which is titled Stereophile and D'Agostino, Is It Really a Progression? Now, I have to explain for people that are not hardcore audiophiles, Stereophile is an audio publication that's been around since the early 60s. And D'Agostino is Dan D'Agostino, who is one of the best-known amplifier designers in history. He founded a company called Krell back in the 1970s. And more recently has been, for the last 10 or 12 years or so, has been doing a company called Dan D'Agostino Master Audio Systems. So as Jeff details in his column, he's actually kind of talking about this Stereophile review and the issues that it brings up. So Stereophile did a review, and the writer, as in most cases, a writer does a review, subjective review, listens to the product and writes about it. And they have someone else who's more technically oriented measure it, which they did, which, SoundStage does mostly the same thing, not on SoundStage solo, because I do the measurements and most of the listening. But anyway, so Stereophile had a writer, Jason Victor Serenis, one of their longtime writers, do a subjective review of this amplifier. It's the Dan D'Agostino Master Audio Systems Progression M550 monoblock power amplifiers. You need two of them for stereo. It's $45,000 for a pair of these things. So, really super high-end stuff. But they sell a decent amount of these things. They sell enough of them to have a nice facility in Cave Creek, Arizona, where they build them all by hand. And anyway, so the controversy comes in because Dan D'Agostino is well known with, a lot of the equipment that he's done with Krell measured beautifully. Like you would, as a measurement guy, I would like to have that kind of thing around because it measured perfectly, and it hit its power rating with some power to spare, which a lot of amps don't. There was like no notable noise, and the frequency response was dead flat out to who knows what, at least 200 kilohertz and not higher. So they basically kind of measured perfectly. And yet with this new amplifier, the measurements they published in Stereophile showed that they have this amplifier, which is $45,000 a pair, has
a lot of money.
0.15% distortion.
Oh, I thought it was up to like 0.25.
Was it 0.25?
Hang on, let me look.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I'm looking at his specs. Hang on, I'm looking at the original specs. But the actual measurements are apparently not that good. I'm trying to find the original.
I'm reading what Diego wrote. Diego does all of my measurements for
Diego
Stun,
who is the electronics measurement guy for SoundStage.
Mm-hmm.
And so he found
THD plus N varied between 0.15 and 0.25%.
Total harmonic distortion plus noise, which is a lot, because a lot of amps, I mean, it's not hard to make an amplifier that has less than 0.1% distortion, or even much less than that.
Mm-hmm.
So now here's the thing, though. I mean, how much distortion can you actually hear?
That's a good question.
And that varies a lot with frequency, right? With subwoofers, the generally accepted sort of general threshold for subwoofers is about 10% distortion before you can hear it. And I can confirm that because I measure subwoofer distortion all the time. And that's about what it takes. Whereas with an amplifier running at, 1 kilohertz or something like that, it's generally accepted that somewhere around 0.5% to 1% is the threshold of audibility. So whether or not this amplifier has an audible problem is a big question. And now the writer, as I mean, I've never seen a negative review of a Dan D'Agostino product. I can't remember any negative reviews of Krell products. The writers are like, oh my gosh, this is fabulous. It's just wonderful and blah, 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 blah. Right. It's kind of predictable. We see that a lot in high-end audio writing. If it's some storied brand, they're probably going to get a pretty good review. And actually, the product's probably fine.
Yeah. There's a lot of cult of personality.
There's a lot of cult of personality, and that's okay. And, that's part of what you're buying into. And, look, these amplifiers work fine for music. Okay. John Coltrane still sounds like John Coltrane. Motorhead still sounds like Motorhead. So that's not an issue. I think that the point Jeff brings up here is that, should a piece of gear this expensive have these kind of measurements, which are, which are easily outclassed by, $1,000 amps from Parasound.
Oh gosh, I just reviewed this $550 integrated amp from Emotiva, and when Diego measured that, the first thing Doug, our publisher, did was emailed me and said, "God, this is perfect." For $550, this thing measures as well as you could hope for an amplifier to measure. So, is there really any excuse for a $45,000 monophonic amp that doesn't? So
and Jeff, lower down in the article, Jeff is citing like a Boulder amplifier that has distortion that's like 0.00053 at 2 kilohertz. Okay, so incredibly low. And now, can you hear the difference between 0.1% distortion and 0.00053% distortion? You cannot. I don't care how good you think your ears are, you cannot hear that. Basically, you're down, just off the top of my head, you're probably down about 70 or 80 decibels below the signal, even for the 0.1%. And what is that? I have to do the math. I can't. Anyway, so but with the Boulder amplifier, you're like 100 decibels below the signal level. So 100 decibels is like the range of a pin dropping on a tile floor to the range of a really loud rock band. Okay, I mean that's a giant range, right?
Yeah.
So you can't, and when a loud rock band is playing, can you hear the pin drop on the floor? No, you cannot. I don't care what magazine you write for, you cannot hear that. And so I honestly don't know the answer to this question. Jeff goes up in there and talks about how Dan D'Agostino says, when he was doing Krell, they really were constantly chasing, having better measurements. And now he's doing a lot more listening and he's trying to make it more musical. However, every high-end audio amplifier manufacturer says, oh, we do extensive listening tests. Here's one thing I really like to see. Message out there to all high-end audio amplifier manufacturers. I know you do these extensive listening tests. Can you please document your listening tests? Like, how did you do them? What was your methodology? What was the matching? What did you compare the product to? Who listened? Was it a blind test? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
And this is never shown. It's just, we're supposed to just...
It's an article of faith.
It's sort of like if I made you a cup of coffee at my house and said, oh, well, I did, hundreds of hours of testing to find the perfect, amount of coffee and the perfect brewing temperature and all that sort of thing. Well, maybe I did, but it's an article, as you said, it's an article of faith. It's like, I'm supposed to just believe that. And then also, as once you, as Paul Barton from PSB Speaker says, once the tests are blind, everything changes. And, I have a couple different blind testing switchers, one of which I built and one of which I bought. When you get these switchers, you think like, oh, well, I'm going to beat the switcher. I can hear these differences. And boy, once you do it, and what you have to do is you have to, with an ABX test, you listen to A, which is one amplifier, and B, which is the other amplifier. And then you listen to X, and you have to decide whether or not X is A or B.
Right. And
it's a very, very demanding test. But, if you can hear the difference in an ABX test, there is a difference. Okay,
a measurable difference. Yes,
but there is a clear difference if you can hear between two, in an ABX. And so you go through these trials, and you go through maybe like 24 trials of it with whatever music you want and forever what length of time you want, whatever, and then you get your results. You're just like, oh, my results were random. So. And I don't care who you are, unless the amplifiers are radically different, like maybe a Dynaco Stereo 70 and a Krell, let's say, or a D'Agostino. You're not going to be able to tell the difference. You're not going to, with two solid state amps. It's extremely unlikely you could tell the difference. And so you get into like, what do these listening tests actually mean? And then what do they change in the product as a result of the listening tests?
That's what I was going to ask. Like, if they are not happy with these listening tests, what do they do? And furthermore, with this, with this progression amplifier that has the higher distortion, it appears it's a distortion problem more than a noise problem. What are the trade-offs? Like, what were they seeking to improve that distortion was the consequence they were willing to accept?
Yeah. Well, and of course you have amplifier manufacturers now, like some of the tube guys, who are intentionally adding harmonic distortion. And I think Nelson Pass is doing this with the first watt amplifiers, and they're intentionally adding harmonic distortion because it thickens the sound. However, I got to say, as a musician who spends a lot of time on some of his mixes, I know how to add distortion myself. I can do it in a digital audio workstation very, very easily and to exactly the degree that I want. I don't need some amp designer adding distortion to my mixes.
Exactly.
I mean, I don't care if people want to listen. Hey, man, anybody who listens to my music, I'm thrilled if they listen to it. If they want to put it through a fuzz box and put 10 or 20% distortion, that's fine with me too. But I don't need an amplifier manufacturer getting between me and my listener. I don't care if they do, but for the listener to think that somehow the thing that I produce, or that somebody who's actually like talented at mixing produces, needs to be, like an Al Schmidt mix or something, needs to somehow have this distortion added, is crazy to me. I mean, yeah, if it's 0.1% distortion or 0.2%, like in this D'Agostino amp, well, it doesn't matter. You really can't hear it anyway.
And here's the thing. I think you and I have often, I don't know, I don't want to say we've disagreed about this, but I think we have a different philosophy. Like a lot of times in high end, to me, what really sets a piece apart, like this progression amplifier, is like there's just nothing in the world that looks like it. Like, you've got to pay for that industrial design. You've got to pay for that crazy thick extruded aluminum or whatever it is. Yeah,
well, they have many thousands of dollars. Their cost on the metalwork in that amplifier is several $1,000s.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
And I think there is value in that. I think if these pieces are jewelry for your room or what have you, or part of your interior design, hell yeah, man. If I had screw you money, I would love an amplifier that looks like this. But
sure.
but in terms of the sound, I would want it to sound like nothing. You know
what? It's this, but here's the thing. This amp is going to sound like nothing. It's not going to have any particular audible character in control testing. Now, if you can look at this amp and go, my gosh, that's an awesome amp, it must sound great, it's probably going to sound pretty great. But if you conceal it and you shoot it out against whatever, Jeff is talking about this Moon Audio amplifier that's really solid. He's talking about a Boulder. If you put them all together in a blind test with your levels matched to within the fraction of a decibel, you will. I can tell you this much, having done so much of this because I have the switchers at my house, you hear a difference, but you can't. But it's not you don't identify it consistently. You listen to like A and B amplifiers, and you're like, oh, I definitely hear a difference, right? Every single time, you're like, oh, I definitely hear a difference. But then when you actually look at your results, and your results are a wash, then you got it right half the time, which is no better than flipping a coin.
Yeah.
Then you start to realize, like, I definitely hear a difference, and yet I can't identify that difference. So what does it really mean? I don't really know. And when you have most amplifiers getting great reviews, and then you have different, reviewers expressing different results, like, oh, I prefer this Dan D'Agostino amp to this Boulder amp, or perhaps more to the point, I prefer this Dan D'Agostino amp to this Prima Luna Italian tube amp or whatever, right? But then you get different writers from different publications, like, oh, I like this amp, I like this amp, I like this amp. It has no relevance to the music you're listening to. So it's just different flavors. It's like, I prefer my coffee in a red cup, I prefer my coffee in a blue cup. So I know that the color of the coffee cup does influence the way you perceive the taste, but you know what? That has no bearing on what color cup you should drink your coffee from.
So that raises an interesting question then. Why do we measure amps?
To see if they're competently designed.
Yeah.
Now, this amp clearly does not measure like, let's say, a Krell, right? Or like that Boulder amp, or like the Sim Audio or whatever. So, but it measures fine. It makes its power output, which band stuff always does, with room to spare.
I actually thought that was one of the controversies about this.
Oh, was that questionable?
Didn't meet its power output. Yeah.
Hang on, let me go look. I can't remember all this stuff, Dennis. I'm getting old. So, but even if it doesn't make its power output, it's still, how much power do you really need? I mean, these amps are it's like buying a car with 500 horsepower to go get your groceries.
Yeah.
And look, if you're going to get your car on a track, maybe that 500 horsepower is a great thing to have, but you're not. And with this, you're not going to play, no matter how demanding your speakers are, you're not going to push this amp anywhere close to its output limits.
Oh God, no. Yeah.
So I hope for your sake that you're not.
Yeah. I did an article about that not long ago about how little power we actually use. So,
yeah.
I think this is probably a pretty good place to end the conversation, man. We've covered a lot of ground here. Before we go,
have.
Yeah, I wanted to ask what are you working on right now for SoundStage?
Well, since I edit SoundStage Solo, which is the headphone reviews, I am currently, maybe by the time this podcast is out, this article will actually, I got two things one thing I just finished today, which is a review of the Mark Levinson number 5909 noise canceling headphones. These are like the first noise canceling Bluetooth headphones that are $1,000, $999. They say Mark Levinson on the side, so high end ish, but they're like twice the price of other high end ish headphones that are similar, like the Dolly IO6 and the Bowers and Wilkins PX7 Carbon Edition and stuff. So are they twice as good? And then I got an article coming out that will be out the 1st of February that will be, over the Christmas break, I went on a pretty extensive drive to go visit my family and kind of detoured through Colorado and Utah a little bit and stuff. And then came back through, went to CES and all that stuff. And so in my journeys, I picked up, I decided to buy some headphones at truck stops and see how good they are. And so my rule was they couldn't cost any more than $10. And so, so I got a whole bunch of them, and I haven't listened to them yet. I have run measurements. And the results, I can promise, will be very interesting. So what are you working on, Dennis Berger?
Well, while you were on your road trip and going from Texas to CES and exploring all the truck stops, I had COVID. Yeah, and the interesting thing about that is my worst symptom is that I went deaf in my left ear, almost completely deaf. And I wrote a story about it for SoundStage Global, actually, because this is going to seem like a bit of a weird left turn, but in a way, it made me appreciate the Beatles mono mixes, which I've ignored for years, despite audiophile friends browbeating me into giving them a chance. And hey, being deaf in one ear will certainly serve as motivation for that sort of thing. So I've got that coming up for SoundStage Global, and for my own site, SoundStage Access. I've got a piece going up on February 1st, which covers what I believe to be the most dangerous myth in the audiophile world.
Well, yeah. I guess we'll have to wait and see what that myth is.
I guess we will. And who knows, maybe we'll talk about it next time on the SoundStage Audiophile Podcast.
That sounds good to me. So, should we talk about some credits here?
You've been listening to the SoundStage Audiophile Podcast, presented by me, Dennis Berger.
And me, Brent Butterworth.
Editing and engineering by me.
Mixing and mastering by me.
Security provided by Bruno Bartholomew Berger. And?
Missy, she doesn't have a last name.
She doesn't have a last name?
No, she's a Shih Tzu.
Okay. And
she's good security against lizards, or she was until she got old and really couldn't see them anymore. So.
How about squirrels?
No, she doesn't care about them anymore.
And so we should say this is a production of the SoundStage Network with music provided by.
And the music is by me, Brent Butterworth, and with assistance from Dan Gonda and Ron Seiger. And yeah, that's pretty good.
Yeah. Okay, we'll see you next time.
Thanks. Oh, wait, I'm not supposed to say that. No, I'm supposed to say, yes, we will see you next time. So I agree. I agree with you, Dennis. Everybody, we will see you, or you will hear us next time.
Bye.
Bye.
That was pretty good.